Today we're going to be talking about tanking. We're going to be talking about how to fit a tank, when to fit certain kinds of tanks, and how to kind of optimize your tank. So if you're new to EVE or a veteran to EVE, you may have something to learn or some 2 cents to put in the comments. We'll just kind of get started on this. We're going to talk about how to make tank on our ships. There are 3 main ways, or 3 different types of tanks that have a few derivatives each. The first main type of tank would be your shield tank. It's on the first layer of your overview. Whenever you undock, your shield is represented by the first bar, and in the second bar will be your armor. We're undocking to show this here in just a second. But you have 3 tanks on your ship all the time. So the first layer of your health is shields. The second layer, being the second bar here, these little white bars here, would be your armor bar. And when it takes damage and it goes across, it's really obvious about how much you have. So it goes shields are hit first, and then your armor HP is hit. And then after your armor HP is hit, you get hit in a hole. And when your whole HP gets to 0, you're dead. There are several ways to increase your tank and increase how much you heal. And we're going to talk about most of them today. We forgot the 4th type of tank, the IS tank, already replaced. I did forget to talk about the IS tank. The last type of tank is if you have enough IS to replace your ship, you can always buy IS and buy a whole new ship. But that's an entirely different story. So I just want to show that really quick. These tanks are represented in the fitting window. If you hit Alt F, you can open up this fitting window, which is incredibly helpful. We're currently using the Agent Blood Raider ship as a demonstration to show off some statistics here. Maybe I should go ahead and simulate a ship here. I am going to use the Praxis as an example today. I don't like the Praxis as a ship, but it's a fantastic example because it has all the resistances are equal on it. So we can do really easy math to figure out tanks. But we have our Praxis here, and by default, your ship has no fitting on it. It has no tank selected. And the first thing to know about your HP is how much actual HP you have in a field. So first we're going to talk about shield tank and shields in general. Shields have HP, and they also have a regen time. If you divide the HP by the regen time and then multiply it by 2.5, that would be the peak amount of regen that you get, and that math is actually calculated for you in this game by selecting a passive shield recharge. In the fitting window, there's where it says no module here, or it might say something else for you. It might be a number depending on your fit. It will automatically select whatever applies best to you. And in this case, we have no module, so we have no tank. But we do have a passive recharge of 8 HP a second. So if we take this, we go calculator, utilities calculator, and we take our 8,937, 8937, and we divide it by 2499. Go ahead and divide by 2499. We'll get 3.57. And then we take this number and we multiply it by 2.5. Oi, I just screwed that up. 8937. Divide this by 2499 equals this. And then we get to multiply this by 2.5. And we should get a number similar to this. I believe this estimate rounds down, but 8.9 HP a second is the absolute most regen we'll have. And that's because of the way the regen calculation works. Depending on your shield percentage, you regenerate so much HP. A bonus fact that's not really relevant today, or might be relevant today, is that your capacitor functions in the same way. You have a capacitor, you have the regen time for the capacitor. You would divide the regen time, or the capacitor capacity, by the regen time, multiply it by 2.5. The equation for the regeneration is the same for capacitor and shields, and they're considered broken at 27.5, which is right where your best regeneration is at 27.5%. So that is a fun note. So this is how we talk about passive. An active fit for shields would be referred to as a fit that uses a module called... Oh, I'm going to have to do a lot of editing today. There'll be a module called a shield booster. And if you put one of these on your ship, extra large shield booster, simulate, please. Thank you. We put an extra large shield booster, we get another stat, which is a shield boost rate. And this would be referred to as an active tank. And then there's more to this, but we're just brushing on the basic concepts right now. But your active tank is how much shield you regenerate per second. The way that you would find this number, you'd show info on the booster that you're using. You would take the amount of HP that it boosts, which is the shield boost bonus, and you would you would multiply it. No, it's divide by the time. You would divide it by the time it takes to activate, so it's 5 seconds. So in this case, we would take 690 and divide by 5, and that would get us the 138 HP a second. Idea being docked up. Everyone is getting ganked. I'm probably gonna show playing today. So that's how you would calculate that, and it's very similar with armor. But there's active, passive, and regen tanking for shields. A regen tank is built around maximizing this number alongside getting the most resists with active modules. So you would do so using hardeners and other methods to increase your shields. And an active tank or a regen tank would be the tank that you have with active regen and active hardeners, where a true passive tank does not use any active modules. So you wouldn't activate a hardener in any case. It would just truly be regenerative, and those are generally not as powerful as a passive tank or a regen tank, but a true passive doesn't need capacitor at all. There's no capacitor use in it at all. So there's what does that make? There's active tank, there's passive tank, which is the truly no cap use, and there's regen tank, which is the ability to tank based on your regeneration and active fits. You need capacitor for this. And then there is buffer tanking, which would be ignoring this number here. This number wouldn't matter in a buffer. A buffer tank is getting as much EHP as possible using only shields. So shield buffer would be using only shield modules. How much EHP can we get on our ship? To hell with the active or the passive regen stat. And there's a few different modules. We'll go into more depth there. Armor is very similar, except it doesn't have as many options. It only has an active and a buffer, because you cannot passively or regen tank armor. It has no means to regenerate HP on its own like shield does. Shield slowly regenerate on armor, and hull do not. So when we're talking about an armor tank, generally there's an active and buffer fit, and depending on the situation you may want a buffer, and in other situations you may want an active tank. Yes, where this is part of the fitting series that I'm doing, and we're doing a kind of a lesson on tanking, and I'm going to kind of go through everything. And then the third HP line is hull tank, and that's your last line of defense. The hull has a fantastic property, and that is by nature, it generally has a 30 to 33% resist, and most ships have quite a bit of hull. One really cool example of a ship that's really good with hull that people absolutely love is actually a Brutix. And if we go combat battlecruiser and we check out the Brutix, you generally only run buffer tank on hull, because hull repair modules are in mid slots and they repair a very low amount of hull. You can actually get a hull repair rate, but they are terrible. So if we look at hull repair, hull armor, and look at hull repairs, and even if we put a medium tier 2 hull repair, it's only 3.3 HP per second. That's not enough to justify a mid slot. It repairs 60 HP every 18 seconds. So we can't really active tank hull. But the cool thing about the hull tank is there are these modules called in hull upgrades. There are these modules called reinforced bulkheads, and they increase your structure by a percentage. And so the more of these you get on, you get an exponential gain. And then for resistances, it's really easy. You just put on a damage control, and that damage control generally gives you more, and you're going for a buffer. So you get 60% resistances, and you get stack these on top of each other, and you get some crazy amounts of HP for the slot investment. And if you can put all the slots into it, it really, really shines. You can get a lot of tank on some ships because their base structure is high enough that you can get some crazy numbers. There's a few other ships in mind that I have. But let's go back to the praxis here. So we got that kind of sorted. So those are the different ways that you can tank. And yes, those rigs, we'll get into that. We'll go into more depth in each way. But those are the three basic with sub nodes or sub kinds of tank that you can have. Whether or not or what type of tank you pick is dependent on a few factors. We'll go ahead and give a few examples here. So the biggest factor of picking out if you want an armor or shield tank is how many slots you have in mids and lows. Generally, a ship will have more lows or more mids. And if the ship has more mid slots, it's probably going to prefer to shield tank, because all of the shield tanking modules are in mid slots. And all of the armor tanking and hull tanking modules are in low slots. They both have slots in rigs, but they're about equal in rigs across the board. So if we have something, for example, we're going to look at combat battle cruisers today because there's some really good examples. If we look at the Drake, for example, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 mid slots and only 4 low slots. So armor tanking this would be very difficult. It's doable, but it's very difficult. And then you have a bunch of empty mid slots that you don't know what to do with. Whereas with the extra mid slots on the ship, it's going to be able to shield tank a lot better. And then a direct comparison would be a Prophecy, where it only has 1, 2, 3, 4 mid slots. And there's a couple exceptions to this. Every rule has an exception. There are ships that only have 4 mid slots and 7 low slots, and you shield tank that because you're flying in a shield fleet. There are exceptions to all these rules, just to make that very clear. But this ship is going to prefer being to be an armor tank rather than a shield tank because it has far less slots. And then there are ships that can do both pretty well. One weird example is the Myrmidon. It does even have a bonus towards active tanking, but its really low shield regen time, or base shield regen, is silly. So it has a really high base shield regen, which gives it, when you multiply it across all the things, it ends up being really, really silly. So even though it prefers an armor tank, it can shield tank. There are exceptions to this in every way. But generally, a ship that has more, what I'm getting at, I'm trying to drive home here, is a ship that has more mid slots is going to want a shield tank. A ship that has more low slots is going to want an armor tank. So that is when to shield, when to armor. We're going to put a check mark there and do a little star at the end. And go ahead and, yeah, so that's that note is done. Next, we're going to talk about how passive HP regen and how you can get more HP regen on your shields. And we're going to talk about how you can min-max the HP regen. Kevin, thank you for the subscription. I really appreciate it. All those subscriptions do go a long way. So we're going to look at hardware, and we're going to look at modules that would give us additional regen and the side effects for that regen. So in the, of course, we have our simulated thing here. Kind of a chat and lay, don't I? And we click the shield tab. What we can do is the first factor of shield regen is your total HP, and I believe we touched on this earlier in the video. But at 4,375 HP, we have a 1,050 second regen. And the first part of the equation is the HP, and then it gets divided by the shield regen. So the two ways that we can increase our HP per second is we can increase our HP, and we can increase our or we can decrease the regeneration. And there's several modules for these things, particularly shield extenders, being regardless of the variety, always increase your total shield hit points, which will in turn increase your regen. You see, we go from 4,000 to 7,000, and our regen goes up in kind. So if you stack a couple of those, see, it gets pretty good. We get 33 HP a second. The next one that we can do to increase our regen is shield rechargers. These are another mid-slot module, and there's low slot modules for passive regen too. It's not as powerful as active tanking, but you can add additional modules in and get more stuff. But this will increase our shield regen. The shield recharger will increase our shield regen by reducing. So we went from 1050 to 892. It doesn't increase our actual HP, but it does increase our regeneration rate, which means that we end up regenerating more. So as we add these, we're going to get additional HP regen per second. So that gives us additional regeneration. And then the third, or another thing that we can do is, actually there's two of them. There's a shield flux coil, which are pretty interesting. They actually cost you. As you can see, there's a red mark on the HP. It's going to cost us a percentage of our EHP. If we show info on this, it's going to give us 30% faster shield recharge, but 15% penalty to our shield HP. So this nets us additional regeneration without costing us capacitor. So if we do a bunch of these, we actually get a lot of HP per second. But there's another module that you can do, and it has another cost. If you're truly going for 100% passive fit, you don't need capacitor. And what you can do is you can do a shield power relay. And this will divert power from your capacitor and put it in your shield regen. So you get a bigger net gain. We go from 30% to 25%. You get a bigger net gain in HP per module per second, but it's going to cost you your capacitor. So you either get to spend capacitor, or you get to spend, so this one will give me 62. It'll give me more, but it spends my capacitor. Or this one gives me a little bit less HP a second, but the capacitor remains intact. So that's the difference between a shield flux coil and a shield power relay. Generally, passive fits prefer shield power relays, or truly passive fits prefer shield power relays. And you can mix shield power relays and shield flux coils to get the to give yourself a little bit more capacitor if you're running hardeners or other things. PY has changed the game for me. It's so good doing fits, especially how easy it is to import, export, and the ability to change skills. You can see what your best is going down. I really like the in-game fitting tool, and PYFA is fantastic for putting fits together, but the in-game fitting tool is pretty versatile and powerful. If you know base numbers pretty well, the in-game fitting tool, you can multiply numbers by, like, if you're trying to figure out how good a crystal clone is going to be compared to what you have, you can multiply. Yeah, flux coils kill the buffer. That is true. But the shield power relays kill your capacitor, which can be bad. If PyFan had a dark mode, it'd be perfect. But they're both really good tools. So that's two ways that you can get additional regeneration out of your ship. The next way that you can get regeneration is in the rigs. We have rig slots here. If we go into shield rigging, we can get additional regeneration two ways through shield rigs. The first is going to be a field extender. And remember, there's two parts of the equation. There's the amount of HP that you get. A field extender will increase your HP by a percentage, which multiplies with the extenders really well. So you end up with a lot more HP per second. When you add this in, we get an additional 11, it looks like. And then the other one is a field purger. This gives you no additional HP total, so you don't get extra buffer. But it does... I put it on a purger, right? There we go. So, but what it does do is if you look right here at the regeneration time, the regeneration time goes up, and the field purgers generally give you more HP per second, but they don't add to your buffer. So if you're looking for a buffer tank and you're trying to get more total health, then the extenders are a better idea. If you're looking for a purely passive fit where all your regeneration comes from actually filling these up, then the field purgers will give you a little bit more tank. And then there's one more module in the engineering tab that also does help, and it is a power diagnostic system. This module does a lot of cool things, and it's unique in that it helps shields. But this is a power diagnostic system, and what it does is it gives you 5% more shield HP. It gives you a capacitor recharge bonus, a power grid bonus, and a capacitor capacity bonus, and a small shield HP bonus. So these also help with passive tanking, which are really cool. It's another way to increase a little bit of everything. This is at no cost except a lot of CPU. They can be added into passive fits to achieve some pretty cool things. Adria B, thank you so much for the follow. I do appreciate that. But that is all the modules that affect a truly passive fit. Next, we're going to talk about regen tanking, which is a hybrid of being active and having the passive regen. And the reason I say active is that there are two ways. I'm gonna throw this all away. There are two ways to get additional resistances, and we're going to talk in more depth about resistances in the future in this video. But resistances are incredibly important, and they add a multiplier to how strong your regeneration is. So if you have 8 HP a second and you have 50% regenerate or 50% resistances, you effectively take half of the damage. And that means that you now would be able to tank, instead of 8 DPS, you can now tank 16. And we'll talk more about this multiplier later in the video. But it's very important to increase your resistances. And sometimes you have to kind of balance resist and the regeneration, because you get more by adding resist than you would by adding in additional regeneration. So there are two different types of modules, and we refer to them as passive hardeners and active hardeners. The active hardeners are shield hardeners, and the passive hardeners are shield resistance amplifiers. So if we add in a hardener of any kind, so say we're trying to get more kinetic or EM or whatever type of resist, there's a multi-spectrum I'm going to use for this example. But this increases our resistances, which also increases our EHP. So this is really good for buffer tanking too. And we'll talk about buffers in just a moment as well. But the resistances, increasing your resistances has a really significant impact on the amount of tank that you need or that you get from your modules in general. So adding additional resistances helps out a lot. And generally when they're in shields, the only way to get Omni or all resistance types is a multi-spectrum shield hardener. There's not a passive equivalent to multi-spectrum. So if you're doing a truly passive fit, you can only kind of plug holes, and you can, if you want to do a little bit of everything, you can. But oh, I gotta add that to the notes. Plugging holes. We'll talk about that for sure. Plugging holes, I put that in the notes. But adding resistances is incredibly helpful. The benefit to actually I'll do EM here. So active hardeners tend to, in general, I'll get there, Drader. Active modules tend to, in general, have a bigger bonus than an equivalent passive module. So if we look at a passive module, here, the passive module gives 38% EM resistance bonus, and the active module gives 44. Also, the active modules can be overheated to give additional resistances, which the passive modules, you cannot overheat them. So the active modules tend to be stronger, but they come at the cost of a little bit of cap. So this costs me two capacitor per second, and we can see that by activating and deactivating it here. It goes from 2.2 to 2, which on a frigate can be a big deal, and on pretty much any ship that can make or break your cap stability, or make your cap last a lot less time with active modules. So that's something to keep in mind, is that active modules tend to be stronger. They tend to be stronger than the passive modules. And then the third way to increase resistances in shields and hull and armor, we're going to talk about these 3 times, is damage controls. Damage controls are fantastic modules. They increase your resistances across the board. You get 12.5% additional resistance for shields, 15 for armor, and 40 for hull. And that's actually a really, really big deal when you think about it. An additional 12.5% resist doesn't sound like a lot, but it can equal a lot in total tank. And I've seen a damage control make or break a fit very many times. Only way to get shield resist in those slots. Yep, it is the only way to get shield resist in those slots. So if you're trying to get additional resistance, it's something to assess. And also something to note about the damage control is it does not suffer from stacking penalties. Whereas if you stack 2 of the same resistance type, I believe... No, they don't suffer from stacking penalties unless there's 2 of the same kind. So an active hardener does not stack against a passive hardener, which is interesting now that I think about it. And RAH. What is RAH? Can you not use separate RAH? What's the RAH? I'm confused, Funsui. Anyone remember emergency damage controls? Oh man, the meta ones and the reactive armor hardeners. DCU and our reactive armor hardeners have a stacking penalty together. I did not know that. So that's how you would increase your resistances. You have those options to choose from. The next thing that I want to talk about in shield tanking is the ability to repair your shields with a booster. So if we talk about an active shield fit, we're generally speaking about boosters. So if we talk about a shield booster and we put on an extra large, I think we touched on this for a moment earlier, but this costs a lot of capacitor and gives you a lot of regen. So if you can afford this in passive or in capacitor regeneration, which you can make your fit do, I'll have another video on increasing capacitor or making more capacitor for your ship, or how the capacitor works. I'll probably make that in a separate video. But if you get a lot of shield HP per second via boosting, which you guys can see, one module did what 4 modules did on the ship earlier, to increase our boost rate. And this multiplies really well with resistances. So if we increase our resistances and use an active booster, we can get a lot of effective tank very easily. And then boosters come in several varieties. They come in small, medium, large, and extra large. So there's armor doesn't have this, but they don't have extra large. And also you can boost your shield boosters with a shield boost amplifier. So if we put this on with it, it increases it by percentages. So the shield boost amplifier is incredibly useful if you don't want to spend more cap, but you want your shield booster to be stronger. And then every single group of shield boosters has another kind of shield booster, referred to as an ancillary booster. And these ones, instead of using your capacitor, actually use charges to run. So you can put a cap booster inside, and now this will run without using capacitor for 9 times 5. This will run for 45 seconds and keep repping for that 45 seconds until it runs out of charges. But once it runs out of charges, how do I empty the charge here? Once it runs out of charges, it will start to use cap. So they are they're very expensive cap wise. So if we show info, the activation cost is 1,180. We can only activate this 8 times before it expires, or before this thing runs it out of cap. This is a huge cap cost. So you can run them without a charge, but it costs you a lot more capacitor. So that's how ancillary boosters work. And there are fits that alternate ancillary boosters. So if you put 2 ancillary boosters on, they have a reload time of I want to say it is, where's the reload time on this? A reload time is 60 seconds. So there's a 15-second gap if you have 2 of these. They run for 45 seconds, and then they take 60 seconds to reload. So if you have them reload and you have 2 of them, you can kind of split that gap between the 2 of them. You only have 8 seconds for your kind of switching which tank you use. But they're, again, as Windslash is saying here in chat, they're not good for extended engagements. So generally when you're doing PvE and you're in a mission for 20 to 30 minutes, you're not going to have a good time running ancillary boosters because you're going to run out of charges. You can only store so many in the cargo. If we tried to store a bunch of these, we can only store 100. So we have 100 times 9. We would only live for 900 seconds. So it's only about 10 minutes. So running out of charges with ancillary boosters really sucks. So you do want to make sure you don't run out of them. Hey, on saying, how's it going? We're doing a tanking lesson. We're about halfway or most of the way through shields. So we talked about active tanking shield. We talked about we haven't talked about getting the biggest buffer yet. We talked about true passive. So true passive would be getting regeneration and no active hardeners. You remember how we talked about active hardeners? That would be a true passive fit, and then a regen fit would be kind of something in between. But to get more buffer, you would look at this number right here. This is your buffer and how much EHP you have. There are times when you want an active tank, and there are times where you want a buffer tank. In general, if you're in a fleet with more players that have remote reps and can remote rep you, a buffer tank is what you want. When you're kind of on your own, and or the fleet is small and there's not remote reps in the fleet, then you're going to want either a buffer or an active tank. And the buffer active tank will either depend on the FC that's calling for the fit, or depending on your personal preference, depending on so many different factors. But those are your 2 options. You can buffer or regenerate in some way. And we just talked about all the regeneration methods. To get a lot of buffer, you would want to get shield extenders. Add the there's 2 parts to the buffer that matter, and that's your total shield EHP or shield HP, and then it gets multiplied with resist. I actually wrote out the equation. It is 100 divided by this is the actual equation that determines the multiplication of how strong your resists are. So putting your resistance percentage into that number will give you a factor of how many times your tank functions over to get more EHP. So basically how this works, we have 8,937, and then we would run our resists through this. So we do 100, or we would take 100 and we would subtract resists 28, which leaves us with what would that be? It would be 72, and then we would divide 72 by 100. It's going to give us actually have this open in a graph here, monitor here. So actually have this open in a graph. So say we had 23% resist. This will give us 23. Say we had 23% resist. We can click on this point here, and our tank is effectively 1.299 more than 0 resist. So to calculate the EHP or our buffer, we would take the 8, go utilities, calculator, and this is done in game, so you don't have to do it yourself, but this is how the game figures it out. But you go 8937, and then we would multiply this by the number that we get for 23, which is 1.299. All clear. 8937, and then we multiply this by 1.299, and we get our total EHP for shields is going to be 11,609. And then we would do the same thing for our armor and our shield, and then we would add that to the same equation to our armor and shield HP. And EVE Online in this calculator uses your average resistances. It doesn't use your highest or lowest. It adds them up and then divides it by 4. So if we add 28 plus 28 plus 28 plus 28 and divide it by 4, that's the resistance that it's going to use in the effective hit point calculation. So if you have like 50, 70, and 80 here, it would add that up and divide it by 4, and then multiply it by your shield hit points, whatever that equation bumps out to be. It'll multiply it by your shield hit points to get your effective HP in your shield, and then do the same thing for armor, and then the same thing for hull, and then it adds those 3 together, and then it spits out this number. And in this case, we had 1/3 of our HP about was shields because we're in a praxis. But that's a simple, and we'll talk about that in more depth in the future here. Let me bring up my notes. So to get more EHP, you would add extenders, and you would also add resistances in the form of partners of some kind, whether it be passive or active, and these will increase your shield HP by quite a bit. You see how we're now up to 71,000. I think we were 33 before, so now we have 79,000, and most of this is in shields. So we can calculate our shield EHP by putting in 59 into this number here. We can put in 59, and that gives us in our point 2.439 into this graph that I made here. We end up with 2.439 if we have 59 resists. We can go back to the game, and then we would go calculator, utilities calculator, and we had 11,000 shields before effective. Now we would take 21,937, and then multiply it by this number that we just pulled, 2.439. 2.439, and then now our effective shield hit points, it's not 21,937, it's actually 53,504 is how much damage that this chip can take before its shields are broken, if it's fit as is and has the exact same skills and all the other factors are equal. And as you can see, that would mean that we have a buffer of 59 HP before reps need to save our asses or save us. And then the last kind of repair that's very important is remote reps. I will have a logistics episode in the future as well, so I promised 2 episodes. I gotta write this down. A capacitor episode. Where's my thing? I gotta write this down. We're gonna do capacitor, cap, and what did I just say that I do an episode on? The cap episode, and then we do an episode on Logi. That's right, Logi. My dry erase pen is dry. All right, so that's down. All right, so the next part of this presentation, we're going to do. So we talked about shield. Now let's talk about armor. Armor is a little bit different than shields. So we're going to go ahead and exit and reset this simulation here. But armor is a little bit different than shields. How are we doing on time? Ooh, this is taking a lot longer than I thought it would. Armor generally uses low slots, and with shields there were some low slot modules that would help shields, the damage control and whatnot. However, there aren't any mid slots that help armor. This is taking a lot longer than I thought, and it's really basic stuff, but we're gonna get into some more exciting stuff here. But if we go hull and armor, there are several modules that help. I'm just gonna go down this list, and I'm gonna tell you, because there's 2 ways to armor tank. There's passive, and let's use as a whiteboard. Yeah, I have a whiteboard over there. There are 2 kinds of tanks for armor. There's not 4 kinds for shields. There's passive and active. Both passive and active share resistances as a major factor, and there are several kinds of ways to get resistances in armor. The first is resistance coatings. These use CPU, and they actually are these the ones that use CPU? No. Resistance coatings use less CPU, and they're considered passive, so they benefit from the skills of passive, the regeneration bonus, or the I completely whiffed talking about that. We'll talk about those as well. Passive tank skills. We will talk about those in the future, but but generally multi-spectrum coatings provide you a little bit less resistances, but they only cost 1 power grid to fit. So if we show info and we do fitting, they only cost 1 power grid. So they're really, really effective at giving you resistance for low cost. That's the resistance coatings. The next kind of passive resistance that you can get is energized. And I know energized sounds like it's active, but in general, energized will give you more resistance, but on top of the 1 power grid use, they cost a lot of CPU. So 36 CPU consumption is pretty big depending on the ship. So that being said, a little bit less, we have 15.4 versus the 20% that we have on the energized. So as you guys can see, the multi-spectrum and energized have different amounts. So for armor, it's kind of flipped. You can passive tank, Omni, and you can passive tank specific resistances. So there's EM, energized, kinetic, and thermal. Same with the resistance coating. There's multi-spectrum as well. But the actual active hardeners only come in specific resistance variants, with one exception. So just like with a shield hardener, an active hardener is more effective than its equivalent passive hardener, and we'll use the energize as an example here. But this is T2 versus T2, so the thermal has 44 and 39. So we have a slightly more powerful thermal hardener, but we can also overheat it, which is really useful. Hardeners are, again, the active hardeners, they cost about 2 cap, but they're far more effective than just the passive one. And the last kind of hardener, or damage increase, aside from the damage control, which we already talked about, damage control increases your armor resist by 15%, would be a reactive hardener. These are special, and they work in a really cool way. They say by default they have 15, 15, 15. But what they do is when you activate them, they run through a cycle, and every cycle that they go through, they're going to move 15% of this 15-15 resist somewhere else, wherever it is most effective for you to get additional tank. So if you're taking purely kinetic damage, then you would get all this resist would slowly move into kinetic resist, and you would end up with 60% kinetic resist after several cycles. And there's a skill to reduce the activation duration, but these move resistances around to increase your resistance in the profile that is most helpful to you. And it kind of shifts things around based on the data that it takes in and the time. So I think 4 cycles can fully shift this thing from one side to the other, if we show info here. But it can move 15 resists around per cycle. So this module is spread 60 over time, 4 damage starting at 15% each. And it moves 15% from one place to another, or up to 15% from one place to another in each cycle, which can be super helpful. And in specific fits, this is really awesome. I believe that's it for resistance on armor, except for the damage control, of course. Damage control gives a flat 15 for a tier 2, and it's a little bit less for the others, and I believe the shadow is not more. It does not help additionally. Oh, I lied. It's a little bit more powerful. So the faction one's a little bit better. And then for active tanking, we only really have one way to regenerate armor HP locally on the ship, and that is a armor repair system. They come in 3 varieties. They come in small, medium, and large. Unlike the shields having the extra large variant, large for armor is somewhere between large and extra large for shield. But these give you HP per second for capacitor. They're generally less powerful per slot than your average shield booster, but they're a little bit more efficient in the cap department. So generally 2 of these equals 1 extra large, or 1 of the equivalent size or whatever for the shields. So these are really helpful for generating additional armor HP per second. And armor also does tend to have slightly better resists than shields overall. So that's also why they're not quite as powerful per slot. Shield and armor are fairly well balanced between each other, but they do have their pros and cons. Is also cap efficient with the skill at level 5. It is. You would be correct, but it takes time for it to shift. That's a downside. The next kind of tank that I forgot to talk about rigs. For armor rigs in general, what we have auxiliary nanopumps and nanobot accelerators. Both these are for helping the repair rate of... Wow, I missed rigs as a whole for shields in the active department. There's not much to say about shield rigs. I'll put a shield booster on this ship really quick just to simulate it. Hull and armor. And I'll kind of edit and splice this together for the YouTube video. Armor repairs, large. So there's 2 ways to increase your armor repair amount on a armor repper. The first is going to be a nanobot accelerator. And the nanobot accelerator will give you a little bit more HP per second than the other alternative, which is an auxiliary nanopump, and that's because of the way they work. The nanobot accelerator increases your repair rate. It'll reduce the time, so you go from 11.3 to 9.6. But increasing the repair rate and the cycle time, or decreasing the cycle time, does mean that it uses more cap. So that's something that you want to be aware of when you're fitting one of these. And if you're looking to trade a little bit of HP a second for cap, what you can do is you can use an auxiliary nanopump instead. And as you can see, the difference is 96.2 versus 94, and the difference in capacitor is pretty small too. So there's that for active tanking. And then for increasing your HP and armor, for rigs, we have 2 main rigs here, or 2 main kinds of rigs in armor. The first is going to be the resistances. There's tier 1 and tier 2 for all 4 damage types. And then the second is going to be, I believe it's a Trimark armor pump. So the Trimark armor pump gives you more raw HP, and the resistance modules give you more resistance, obviously. So that's how you can increase your buffer. All armor modules, or all armor rigs, come at the expense of your maximum velocity. So they make your ship slower at the base level. So this multiplies, this penalty multiplies across prop mods and whatnot. So you do want to be careful of that if you do have Trimarks or other resistance rigs on your ship, as they do make your ship a little bit slower. As you can see, there's a penalty. We go from 89 to 85 on the ship. So that's something to keep in mind. And then to splice in here, I'm going to splice this. I'm going to take this chunk out and put it in between the start of the armor and the end of the shield. But in rigs for shields, I actually put on the wrong module. We do have a few rigs for shields here, and I accidentally put a shield boost amplifier on here. But there are 2 things that you can do to rig shields. Active shield boosting, shield rigs, large rigs. But you can do a defensive charge economizer. No, it's not that. Defensive charge economizer. Show info. -10 drawback. Power need. Reduces the increase. Reduces at the expense of. Okay, so this makes it so that shield extenders are easier to fit. My bad. But there's a capacitor safeguard, which will reduce the capacitor usage on the shield booster, which will make it softer on your capacitor. And then there's a operational solidifier, which increases the amount of shields that you regenerate or that you boost per second by reducing the cycle rate. So if we have a 5-second cycle rate and we put this on, we end up with a 4.3, increasing our cycle rate at the expense of capacitor. So you can make it softer on your cap, or you can make it make your shield booster boost more per second, which expends additional cap, so it can eat a lot of capacitor. And next, I want to talk about hull. There's really only one way to do a hull tank, and that is to put on a bunch of Trimark rigs, which are in the shield armor rig spot. These also cost... No, it's not Trimarks. It's transverse bulkheads. So the only way to add more hull in your rig slots is to add transverse bulkheads, and these increase your hull tank by a percentage. So we get structure hit points bonus of 25% per. And fortunately, for some strange reason, they didn't add stacking penalties into hull tanks. So what happens is if you have a lot of hull tank stuff on your ship, you end up with an absurd amount of hull. So if we go into hull upgrades here, and we do reinforced bulkheads, this is going to go up exponentially for each one. The difference between the first one and the last one is exponential. And then, so basically you stack as much as you can, and you tune for the damage that you want to do. You can take one off to add more damage, and whether or not that is what you want to do, if you want more damage or tank, you would take one of these off and put on a damage mod or tracking mod or whatever you want to do. And then you always put on a damage control with a hull tank, because the resistance is 33, and adding in additional damage control insanely increases your tank. We go from 150 to 160, and that's a lot more than adding in one more reinforced bulkhead in almost every situation. But all these factors multiply together to make an insane tank. So we end up with a lot of reinforced bulkheads and large transverse bulkheads. There's no real way to repair hull in a rapid manner, as rapid or remote hull reps are really slow to rep. And then you can do hull repairs in the medium slot, but their hull HP per second for each repair is painfully slow. So they don't repair a lot. I mean, you can put a lot of these on it, and it's not going to get you anywhere anytime fast at all. So your EHP per second is really low, but these do make big buffers, and it's kind of fun to do them every now and then. One really weird hybrid example that does exist is in the... I'm going off on a tangent here. If we look at frigates here, one really weird thing that can happen is in the event of a Imperial Navy slicer, which has more HP in structure than it does in armor, what we end up doing is we do an active armor repair, because you get more repair in armor, and the resistances, depending on the profile, it's actually worse, but you get a lot more repair in armor when you repair armor. Hardware charges. This is one example, but you would do an active armor repair with a hull buffer, and that's how the Fed Navy Comet is such an awesome ship, because it's one of the few ships that utilizes both a hull tank and an armor tank in unison to make a big buffer plus an active tank. This ship is really cool because of that. Let's go back to our praxis here. Where's the praxis at? Oh, it's in special edition. That's right. So we're just going to go ahead and click on this button here. Next, I want to talk about, so we're done here. I'm going to check all this stuff off on my notes here. So I do have notes today that I want to go over. And I thought that this first part was going to be really quick, honestly. I thought I was going to do a little bit more of a breakdown, but I feel like we also may have knocked out a couple other parts in this. Did I talk about HP regen? I did talk about HP regen and where it comes from, so we can knock that one off. difference between shield passive regen and the difference between shield regen and passive regen. So Fonsui wanted me to make this one very clear. There's a difference between a feeder Gila and a standard Gila, and that is that if you have any module that uses capacitor and you try and fit up, I don't know if I have it saved here, Gila, actually I have it on this character. So we'll use this character really quick to show this. But if we look at Gilas, cruiser. So if we look at the standard feeder Gila, this is referred to as a regen tanked Gila. This isn't passive, and people call it passive because they're like, oh, it's got passive regen. So this is a passive regeneration but active tanked, because we're dependent on two of these partners. So if our capacitor gets hit and we lose our capacitor, these get shut off and we're in a lot of trouble. So this would be referred to as a regen fit Gila. And then if we took these guys off, right? If we took these guys off and put on, say, in a shield power relay, right? That's mid slot, right? Or am I doing that wrong? Or shield recharger. We put on a shield recharger and an additional extender, and then we drop these rigs, or actually these are all purgers. But if we made this work somehow, I know there's a way to make this work. Now this would be considered a truly passive fit. This is truly passive, as there's no active tanking modules to help. You might want to put on a passive resistance module here, shield resistance amplifier for EM to plug that hole. But this is a truly passive fit. This is how you would truly passive a Gila. But yeah, that's the difference between a regen tank, which is using active hardeners to get the most resist and get the most out of the regeneration, versus a pure passive tank that actually has the resist made completely passive and there's no modules to activate whatsoever. Is a truly passive fit. So I just wanted to touch on that really quick. And then I want to talk about the three different ways to receive capacitor or health in the game, and that is the one that we've spent a lot of time talking about today, is the shield regeneration amount, or how many not shield boost, how much passive regen we get. The second is active tanking, which we talked about for both shields and armor. You can get active tanking. And the third is remote repairs, and they exist for all three: armor, shield, and they exist for armor, shield, and hull. And they can be really powerful. These are normally tied in with fleets. We have fleets generally run a buffer fit. This is how we decide whether we're running a buffer fit or an active fit. If you have logistics that are going to give you remote repairs, you would probably want to do a buffer fit rather than an active fit, as you'll survive a lot longer to give the logistics time to send you repairs. And we'll be doing a video in the future about Logi. Next, I want to talk a little bit more about total hit points and how it's calculated. I know we touched on it in the beginning, but I do want to give a slightly more in-depth explanation of it. But total HP is calculated by taking your hit points and plugging in this equation, which I'll link again, which is 10 or 100 divided by, in parentheses, 100R. So order of operations would make you do 100 minus R. R stands for resistances. So let's say that we had 80% resistances in this. We would take R, which is 80, and take 100, subtract R. And then after we subtract R, we get 20. And then we would take 100 divided by 20 equals 5. There's a multiplier of 5 to our health and our hit points, which also multiplies through to repairs. So say we had 100 HP a second, right? So say we had 100 HP per second regeneration or repairs in some way, and then we had 80% resist. That 80% resist means that we have a 5 times multiplier in the tank. The way this math works out, I'm bringing up the graph again here, but the way this math works out means that we have 500 HP tank, and I use really rough math to guesstimate how much damage I'm actually taking. Whenever somebody's like, how much tank do you need? I do the inverse to figure out how much DPS is actually coming in based on the DPS monitor. But this graph is a really helpful thing. I plugged this equation into a graphing calculator and made it solve for X being resistances, and we get this graph here. So of course it starts at 1, so this begins at 1 because we have a factor of 1. And then as resistances go up, so this red bar going across, as resistances go up, as we approach 50%, it hits 2. And then from there, it goes up exponentially. And this is a really cool thing. So 60% resist, from 50 to 60, is the same as from going from 25 to 50. And then from going from 60 to 70, or just below 70, is about the same as going from, or is more powerful than going from 50 to 60. And it goes exponentially up, and as you get up towards above 80, it kind of gets out of control. So 85% resist is significantly better than say 83, but 22% resist is not much better than 23% resist. So as you approach 100, it gets exponentially better as you get your resistances up. And we're going to talk about how this equation affects the resistances. And I did want to talk about this calculation. So if you use this equation with your resistances, and then, or if you know that you're taking 100 DPS of damage and you have X resist versus this, you can do the equation in reverse and figure out how much damage is actually being applied to you, which is still really, really helpful. So that's what I wanted to mention, the resistance multiplier. And then when to use local repairs and when to use a buffer. We already talked about that. When you have remote reps and an ability to regenerate, or when you just want to survive for a certain amount of time, you would use a buffer. And all that a buffer or local repair is to buy more time for your guns to do their job. So if a buffer, for example, that Federation Navy comment that we looked at, if a buffer would give you more time in most circumstances, you would want to use a buffer. If a local rep gave you more time in most circumstances, you would want to use a local repair. And that's kind of how we decide. The next one that I wanted to talk about, wow, we were getting through this a lot faster than I thought. I thought that this was going to be the long part and this was going to be the short part, and it's turning out to be the opposite. We talked about when to shield and when to armor already. And then now I want to talk about how to measure and figure out how much tank you need, or if you can afford to trade tank for DPS. So for this situation, we're actually going to see a little bit of gameplay. We're going to go ahead and hop into our Vargur here, and we're going to pull a random mission. Oh, well, Namek Agent, Angel Cartel is not a good example. That's not a good example either. Oh, yeah. It's giving me all the burners that I normally want, and this is kind of frustrating. Rogue drone harassment. Yeah, let's go ahead and put some actual deep... Actually, we'll use the fit that we used earlier for rogue drones, and we will use our Chronos that we made yesterday, that we're doing these guys in. We're doing some of the content yesterday we normally do. So we got our Chronos here. I'm going to modify this fit a little bit because I don't need these modules here. I want Micro. Which one did I get? Sure. Okay. Oh, this is a bigger mission. No, let's not do this one. I thought this was the infiltrate outpost. Smash the supplier is not a good example. I'm gonna have to run some missions. Angel transport. Okay. We'll get this set up. Sorry, we're gonna use a different ship. I want to use the Vigilant for this example here. Make it active. I should have recorded this whole thing local, and I didn't record this whole thing local, so I'm gonna have to download it after the fact. Boy. Okay. So this is a good example of having a buffer fit and an active fit to buy time. So in this fit, we have a bit of a buffer. We have 14,000 HP, and we have a bit of active regeneration here. And both of these together is going to buy me just enough time for my guns to do their job. And I'll show you guys how this one works out. But off we go, and then we'll stabilize it, and then I'll show you guys how to kind of calculate the DPS that or the tank that we need for each one midway through this mission here. Probably should have set this one up on its own earlier, right?
Drive active.
So while we're in route, I'm going to talk about this note here while we're setting this up. So if we go to the monitor, this note here says stacking penalties versus resistance calculations, and resistance is calculated into increased resist. So I'm going to open up a actually this is perfect. We have 0% EM resist, and we can simulate something here. A nice clean slate here. So we have 0% EM resist, and that means that in our shields, we have 2,718 EM HP here. And if we go into shields and look at shield hardeners, there's two factors here that are at play when you do this. Let's say we add the first EM hardener, right? That's going to give us 44%. And if we add a second EM hardener, it's going to suffer from two things. So this is 44% more resist, and we're going to go ahead and go calculator here. Utilities calculator. And so say the first one gives us 44 resist. We expect the second one to give us 44. So some people might think that 44 plus 44 equals 88, right? You would think 44 plus 44 equals 88. So I should have 88% resist. Doesn't quite work that way because, again, this equation here. So if we go to 44, right, and we add an additional 44% more resist, so that's 0.786 multiplier to the HP. We add 44% more. This calculator says that we get to an additional 44% resist, or 1.7 multiplier to 44 equals 66. So we can say 1.786 times 1.786 is how much resistance we should get, which actually equals 66, which is 2.9. We expected about that. So that's how come 44% more is. And there's also a third factor here. I believe it ends up being the actual math. 44, or hold on, let's look at this really quick. 44. So the first factor is 1.786 times 1.786. So we can go back to this calculator, utilities calculator. We'll go back to the screen. 1.786 times 1.786 equals a 3.1%, and we had 2.9. So what gives? Big Wilks gifting a sub to it's their first gift sub. Thank you, Big Wilks. I appreciate that. Congratulations, Mondo Master, on the sub. But there's a stacking penalty, and if we hover over this little yellow icon and look at diminishing returns, it actually tells you this in the fitting window, and it's really helpful. So diminishing returns means that the resistance bonus on the second module is only going to give me 87% of its effectiveness rather than the full 100%. And keeping this in mind is kind of important. So we would take the 44, we would go 44 and multiply this 44 times, I think it's 87, so 0.87, we get 38.28. And then 38.28 additional resists, 38.28, will give us a multiplier of 1.62. Whereas the 44 was 1786. So 1786, 1.786, and multiplied by, what was that last number again? Oh man, what was it? And then we would multiply 1.786 by 1.68. Man, too many numbers. Plus utilities calculator, 44 times 0.87 equals 38.28. 38.28, which is 1.62. So we would take the 1.786 and multiply by the 1.62, and this gives us a effective HP on our ship of 2.8933. And then we can verify this again. We can verify it by doing the math backwards. So we can figure out what this is by plugging in x, or that in the equation we can solve for x for being 2.82, which we have the graph. It's a little bit easier. We can verify that we're correct on our math by plugging in the 66% resist here. 66, 2.941, 2.89. So we got really, really, really close on the math. And that is how the 66 is. It's probably a little bit less than 66. It's probably like 65.9 or something, and it ended up rounding up. Is what happened here. But that's how the math works with stacking penalties. And then if you do a third module, we would then have to calculate in the stacking penalties for the third module. So we take 44 times 0.57. So 44 times 0.57. This module is only going to give us an additional 25% resist. So if we get an additional 25% resist to 66, I know this is complicated math, but say it's 50. An additional 25% resist would bring us to 66, or 62.5, I think, or something like that. But now we would multiply the 25%. Yeah, we'll go back to the monitor. We'll multiply this 25%. 25 gives us a 1.33 multiplier to our tank. And we would take the previous multiplier, which was 0.66, which was the 2.914. 2.914 multiplied by 1.33 would equal 3.875 times the tank. And we end up with 75 resist from that. There's something wonky in my calculations here. So 3.8, 75 is times 4. So we end up at 75 is times 4. It says 75, but 3.8 is 74.2 or so on the graph. So it might be rounding up to 75. But 3.8 is really close to 4. And it's just rounding. So this does a lot of rounding. It's probably not actually 66. Or it's probably not 75. It's 74 point. Looks like it's going to be 74 point. Looks like it always rounds up. Yeah, 74.1 or 0.2 is what the actual math ends up being. Given my math isn't 100% accurate, but it does round to make it a little bit easier for you, and then the rough maths still work really well. So we can say that 75% resist gives us 4 times the tank pretty easily. And then what's crazy is from 75 to 80% resist, we end up with 5 times the tank. So for 5 points, we get an additional time. So a 20% increase in resist would equal 5% at that point. And that's why they kind of stack. And as you add a lot of partners, you end up with a lot of really weird numbers that don't make sense. And I just kind of wanted to explain that. Anyways, let's get into this one. And I really hope I explained that well enough. Let's go ahead and clear this really quick. We're going to get to one thing. I do have this up, right? This is working. Got here, you're going to put this one on YouTube's? Yes, that's the plan. So PLED should be up. Yeah, it's up. So we're going to run the first part of this mission really quickly. I'm going to edit it and condense it because there's a lot of weird information here. Or my editing and condensing will be me taking out the editing and condensing every time that I edit and condense. So how I measure DPS, and I'll provide a link in the description, is I use this PLED DPS meter, and what it does is it counts all of the data coming in here, and then it kind of measures and sticks it in the corner here. So we can tell that we're taking about 200 DPS in peak. And then I'm going to show you guys how to use this to optimize your tank. And in some situations like this, it gets complicated, especially with multiple damage types coming in and whatnot. Yes, it is great content for that. This is going to be part of my fitting series, is the plan for it. And this is where Pyfa gets really useful. I don't actually have... Do I have Pyfa installed? Pyfa. It is seriously out of date. So we're going to kill all but one of these guys. Yeah, my Pyfa's out of date. We're not going to play with it too much. Download that. Yeah, updating Pyfa is going to be a pain. All right, so we're stable in this state. So we can measure data at this point. So what I'm getting at is we are measuring that we're taking in so much DPS, measuring about 38, 37 DPS. And we can figure out that our tank is overkill for 1. And 2, if we multiply this average number, which appears to be about 38, or we'll just say 40. So we can say that it does about 40 damage per second to us. And our resist profile is 74, 78, 48, 48. And if we show info on this guy, he does EM and explosive damage with a little bit of kinetic. So when there's multiple different incoming damage types, this gets really complicated really quickly. But when there's 1 or 2 damage types, you can say 75% of every 100 DPS for every 100 DPS I take, 59 comes from explosive, 12 comes from kinetic, and 29 comes from this. You can derive a little bit of math and figure out how effective these reps actually are overall for the reps, and then you can decide whether or not you want a different kind of hardener or not, if you want to get a multi-spectrum energized membrane or reactive, or if you want to switch that for a damage control or whatever. And Pyfa is really good at that, as you can put in specific. So if you do have Pyfa, when you're calculating your incoming damage or your tank, you can put in specific profiles. I can't remember exactly how to do it, but the EHP a second Dude. Why do I have a recoil fitting saved? I'm not familiar with this. There we go. So we have this ship here in Python. And it's got the specific resist. We have 170 EHP per second. Given this, you can change the damage profile. And I'm trying to remember how. Okay, so there's NPCs. There's different ones. Burner Dremiel is Angel. So we can see our damage profile. Our effective tank against this NPC is 96 HP a second, which means that we could tank 2.5 of these with this HP. So if you import this, then you can play with this fitting in Python and figure out what you want to do to increase your tank. And it didn't grab everything from this, but you can figure out what additional modules you need to increase your HP per second to the NPC. And you can kind of pick this, but basically these EHP profiles, generic, if we do EM, it'll tell us that we have 142 HP versus EM because of our 50% resist, which is literally double. And that's kind of how this works. And then Python has some really useful stuff. There's a bunch of NPC stats in here. There are so many of them, and we can go ahead and pick out what we want to tank with and how much tank we actually need and derive exactly how to fit the ship from that using our information that we have collected further or earlier in this video. But that's how you would do that. And always remember this effect and how big of a role resistance plays in resistance and effectiveness. Going from 90 to 95 is insane. Going from 80 to 85 is really good. Going from 70 to 75 is really good. Going from 10 to 20 doesn't really do you a whole lot. So adding those resistance really helps. Next, we want to talk about, I talked a little bit about how to optimize tanking. I don't have a whole lot about that. How to measure DPS. This is how I measure incoming DPS. Generally, I optimize for 1 or 2 rats, or I try things. And then we use Python Live DPS to figure out how much DPS we're taking in. And then we adjust our fit accordingly. And then if we are way over tanked, and I look at this and I see that I have like 42 HP a second, and I know that I'm repairing 71 HP a second, I can shave a whole lot of tank off. So I can take, say, this module off and put on more DPS to be able to kill the ships faster. And this is how I kind of modulate and figure out my fits for invasions, incursions, and other big activities. Because we kind of, we go with something that's obviously over tanked, and then we slowly remove tank to kind of get right where we want it to be. So we have just enough tank to do our job, and then as much DPS as we can after that. That's how I figure out a lot of faster ones. How resistance is added to calculations, we talked about that. Stacking penalties, we also talked about stacking penalties a little bit. And then I want to talk about plugging holes next. So when you're trying to omni-tank or trying to deal with a certain resist profile that is less than ideal, a really good example would be Axe have big holes in them. So we'll look at heavy assault cruisers. The one that comes to mind for me is the Vagabond. So this ship has some interesting holes in it. Where do noobs who just finished intro agents start doing PvE? I would start with the SOE Epic Art. That's a good way to get started. And then learning Abyss would be the next thing that I would do. SOE Epic Art will keep you busy for a while. The hardener change messed with the import. Yeah, I don't have it updated. So when we're trying to plug a hole, in resistance in general, or we're trying to get the most overall EHP, we would always plug the hole. This is more important for PvP than PvE, because sometimes the hole doesn't matter. Sometimes it really matters. So if we were going to PvP, we would be worried about kinetic damage. We would want to add more kinetic damage to the ship in both shields and armor. But if you're armor tanking this and you wanted to have a better time, you would really want to plug this hole. So plugging holes depending on the fit is very important. Sometimes it's not a big deal, but you do want to take note of where your holes are and note if you need to plug them or not. And then the last thing that I wanted to talk about, I think we've talked about everything on this list so far today. We just talked about the DPS here. We haven't talked about sig tanking and what does signature radius have to do with tanking. That's one thing that I forgot to talk about. And this is actually a really good place. So, this NPC has a tiny signature radius, and it's moving really fast. If you have a bigger signature radius, especially with passive tanks, when your signature radius is bigger, this motion doesn't affect you as much, but when it's smaller, it affects you more. This is how the Hawks were able to do Tier 5 Abyss for the longest time, and how bigger ships can kind of deal, or smaller ships can kind of deal with bigger ships. So here we have Burner Escort. There's no way in hell I'm tracking this thing, because it's got a tiny signature radius, and it's moving really fast. So because it's moving really fast relative to me, it's really hard to track. And there are varying degrees of the severity of this. In this NPC's case, Eve NPC stats, Burner, Gramuel. Okay. So we're gonna look at this guy's stats. So we look at the monitor. This thing is ludicrous with the signature radius. I'm actually running out of cap because I'm running the gun. So this thing has a signature radius of 11 meters. It's outright cheating. Oh man, this thing is outright cheating. I don't know of a single ship that actually exists in the game that has an 11 meter signature radius. But this thing has an 11 meter signature radius. And because it moves really fast, it's damn near impossible to hit. So with its motion and the tiny signature radius, its tank is multiplied exponentially with that. And I don't have the exact calculation like I do with the resistances, because it varies based on turret tracking, the explosion radius, and the explosion velocity and the velocity. But with 36 turret tracking, we really needed to slow this thing down to be able to fire at it. So even if we slow it down to 12 meters a second, which we will with the triple web here, we're going to go throw a triple web at this thing, and it was going 1200 meters a second, now it's going 11. So I can track this thing now, even though it has a tiny signature radius. But if it moves at all, so if I start moving in one direction, and I start moving at 82 meters a second in a direction, now I don't track it. That's all it takes. That is all it takes with that little tiny signature radius. They do cheat, and they cheat a lot. The burners do. And one of the ways is signature. But most times things will be able to hit you. Most times they'll be able to hit you in some way. But with a smaller signature radius, you can expect to take less damage when you're in motion. If you're not in motion, it doesn't really help. We can approach or go directly away from him at any speed that we want, and the tracking won't be affected. Guns are fantastic like that. You can approach or fly away from things directly, and you'll always be able to apply full damage. It's a really cool thing. I'll do a video about tracking and a separate video about missiles. But yeah, the tracking is awesome. I like how it works, but a big factor for both missiles and for guns is your signature radius. The smaller this is an effective multiplier in your tank. And it goes up exponentially the smaller the signature radius gets. So that's something to keep in mind when you are designing a fit, especially like this guy. And why I can't endorse passive fits for the Gila. Because if we look at the Gila, it's got a massive signature radius. The active Gila has a much larger signature radius than the active Gila has a much smaller signature radius than the non-active Gila. So with a 171 signature radius, we take a lot less damage versus Karen versus the damage that we would take versus Karen with the same resist because of the bigger signature radius. This mitigates a lot of DPS, and it's actually a really big factor in the equation, as well as resist. Sweet, they messed with Jaguar recently. But I think that's all that I really have on tanking, because we talked about signature tanking. Speed tanking is using the signature to mitigate damage or to remove damage all the way. We managed to stretch signature tanking and do level 5s and stealth bombers the other day, or last week. It was a lot of fun. This is why micro warp drives don't mix with signature tanks, because they make your signature way bigger. But I think that is it for this lesson. Yeah, I talked about everything. You decline until you get burner missions or not? Sometimes I just wait until I get it. I decline missions until I get burner missions or a mission that I deem as good. I do both good missions and burner missions. But I actually expected that to take a bit longer, and we actually talked about everything that I wanted to talk about. Does anybody have any tanking questions? I want to answer questions. Even if you were here when I answered the question and you didn't get that answer, I'll gladly answer your questions. Does anybody have questions? I can do a open Q&A segment, I guess, about tanking. Chat was really quiet today, but this was a lot of fun to do. Before Overlogi, Jaguar, when it started hitting harder. Teacher, are PvP questions left? You forgot homework? I'm not gonna assign homework. Just keep talking, not much to chat about. It's a good counter to speed tanking. Webifiers, tracking computers, and yeah, webs and tracking computers. Getting better application on your ship is the hard counter to signature tanking. Should a ship's base cap stat influence whether it should be active or passive? That's actually a big one. It can. So sometimes you'll find that you just don't have the capacitor to run both an active tank and like your guns. I'm looking at the Abaddon. Generally that thing, it's got a big resistance bonus, and it doesn't have a very strong capacitor, so it's not really good at being an active tank. So there are situations where that would be true. It can have an influence on whether you want to active or passive tank a fit. I can definitely see that being a thing. I want to hull tank Erebus, yay or nay? Nay, definitely nay. You want with assets like that are really big, they depend on remote repairs to get their health, so they would depend on faxes to keep them alive. The single best thing you can do to protect your Erebus is give it more EHP via additional resistances. Because say you have 1% less resist at the 90 to 95%, that 1% is a huge deal. So much so that hull tanking, you lose all that and you die. So in the case of Titans, your armor shields, they'll never hull tank them unless you're doing something solo, which would be pretty obscene. PvP ate my dog. I mean, homework. Serious Deinhardt, thank you for the follow. I do appreciate it. How should one balance your ship's DPS versus tank when heading out to PvP? That is entirely by feel. So I'm not an expert on PvP. I like to do a lot of PvE, and the balance is very clear cut. I would play around and figure out what you like. We generally use a comparison of tank versus gank. The gank would be your DPS, the tank would be your EHP. You trade tank for gank and figure out kind of what you feel. The bigger the engagement, though, generally, the more important EHP becomes. So as you add additional pilots to a fleet, EHP becomes very important. We tried to do a max gank fleet once, and losing pilots sucks more than losing DPS. So adding more EHP to ships, in the larger the engagement, the more important EHP on each ship becomes. I prefer micro warp drive because of the speed, but the Afterburner Tengu is such a fantastic signature tank. It is insane.
Warp drive.
Like, they are so surprisingly good at signature tanking. Halidor, thank you for the follow as well. I do appreciate that. And then also, thank you guys for the subs today. Fragmented, I think BJN, Kelflin, Brockers, and Bill Wilkes decided to gift them. There's a few actual subs of them. The gifts were from Big Wilkes.
Permission requested.
Thank you for that, guys. I do really appreciate it. So Ishkur, armor tank, active or passive for PvP. I'm always aware there may not be time for armor repairs as cycles take so long. That's another one that's dependent on what you prefer. So if you're flying a buffer Ishkur, sometimes it might be better. It depends on how much damage you're taking in. So if you're taking in a lot of damage in a short amount of time, then generally a buffer is better. Buffers take time to pay for themselves. So after you survive for so long, an active tank would be better. So it depends on the engagement length. For longer engagements, generally active tanks are better. And for shorter engagements, generally buffer tanks are better. When would you choose active partners versus non-active? I would use active partners whenever possible because of the additional resistances. But if I'm starving for cap in any way or have any concerns about cap, then I would prefer a non-active partner. That's kind of how I look at it. So more times than not, I'll pick the active partner. And sometimes in big fleets where you expect there to be a lot of nuke pressure, I know that super caps and caps tend to be active or tend to be passive fit, even though it costs them a lot of EHP because they get neutered out when they're targeted. I forgot to talk about tanking skills. Let's go over this, guys. Really quick, tanking skills. Let's go. So, tanking skills for shield are going to be... Go right down the list here. Can I... No, much. So tanking skills for shields. The shield compensation makes boosters take less capacitor. The shield emission skill will give you... Actually, you know what? I'm just going to go down them in order. That's how we're going to do this. EM shield resistance, the compensation skills. So EM, thermal, explosive, and kinetic compensation skills are used to increase the resistance of passive resistance amplifiers. So they don't add to the resistance of hardeners. They only add to resistance amplifiers, and it's 5% of their percent. So if it is a 50%, hardener, which they don't exist. I know they don't. I'm just using it as an example for the calculator. Or say it's a 20% hardener, right? So you have 20%, and then we have this train to 5, so we get the full 20% bonus. We would multiply by 1.2 because that's 20% additional. We get 24% resist. So these would add additional resist. It works the same for the armor, and we'll touch on those skills when we hit armor. But these compensation skills help out immensely when you're doing passive tanks. If you're flying something bigger that does have a true passive tank, you do want to train these skills. Shield compensation adds to or reduces the capacitor need for capacitor boosters. So this is really useful for getting your Hela to be cap stable for doing Abyss, and or for making your active shield tank use less capacitor. Again, it could mean the difference between having a stable ship and a not cap stable ship. Shield management will increase your bonus to shield capacity. So this is really important for getting your EHP up. Shield upgrades reduces the 5% shield power upgrade power grid needs. So it reduces the the power grid needs for modules that it's required for. So if you click on this required for tab, it increases the power grid use of all these modules, is what the skill will do. And then obviously for tier 2 or 3, it reduces for those, 4 it reduces for these. So all these modules, the amplifiers, and the extenders for resistance modules and extenders, it's going to reduce the power grid need for those. Control X, right? Alt X. Alt X. Make that big again. The next one would be capital shield operation, is just like the shield compensation, except for capital modules. The next relevant skill is going to be shield operation. This makes it so that this allows you to use shield boosters. So you need to train it to use shield boosters, which is really freaking weird, that it's required for the use of shield boosters. However, it is also the skill which makes your recharge time and your fitting go down. So every level that you train it, you get a 5% reduction in shield recharge time from base. So this is really helpful for mostly for regen fit people. We'll get the most benefit out of this. And then tactical shield manipulation is an interesting skill. How it works is with this to 0, once you have 25% shields, 25% of the damage that you take will start bleeding into armor. And then as you train this up to level 5, that gets reduced by 5% each time. So 20% will go into armor, and then once you get to 20, once you get to 3, I think it's 10. Once you get it to 2, it's 5, so as you train this, that bleed won't happen as much. Some people say that for regen tanking, it's better to keep this one trained to 0, as you don't bleed into hull or into armor, and you get to keep some of your regen, which is very interesting. You would either want this at 0 or 5. At 5%, or at train to 4, at 5% of the damage that you take will go into shields, or will go into armor, which is not going to change much. So you either train this to 5 or leave it alone. I always recommend training it to 5 or to 4. 5 is unnecessary. 5% going either way, going in and bleeding is not a big deal. But it doesn't make a big difference. I would prefer to have it to 5, and that's because those times when I broadcast for shields and they catch me at 10%, I don't take hull damage. Not taking hull damage in that last bit is really helpful. So training this to 5 kind of makes your shields a complete solid layer. And then also training it to 4 allows you to use, you have to train it to 4 to use hardeners. So it's required to 4. Level 5 for the invulnerability core. But training it to 5 is helpful in that you never bleed through the armor until you're out of shields. And I think that in a PvP situation, that's better, because most times you'll be buffer fit than not buffer fit. And if you're broken past 25%, you're already broke anyways. You should be finding an escape plan. So whether it goes into armor or hull at that point, it doesn't matter. Nets, thank you for the Twitch Prime sub. And then now let's talk about the armor skills here. So for armor, there's a lot of them. We'll go right down the list in order. Armor layering is a fairly interesting skill. For armor layering, it reduces the penalty of your speed that you get for fitting up an armor plate by 5%. So this will make your ships that have plates on them fly faster, which is really helpful. So you, the penalty is an X% for whatever plate. So if you pick an 1800 plate, you take so much of a percentage penalty to your velocity And this will reduce that penalty. It's a lot like a rigging skill, where it reduces the penalty. EM armor compensation is a lot like the shield compensation. It works in the same way, where it increases the amount of resist you get from coatings and energized platings. Hull upgrades will increase or are required to use hull modifications and damage controls. Everybody should get this to 4 ASAP, and then 5 shortly after, because this allows you to use all the tier 2 modules that you would want to use for tanking, and it's really, really helpful training to 4, being able to use the T2 multi-spectrum, the T2 damage control. But this gives you 5% additional armor hit points per skill level. Sorry, this is not the other one. And then mechanics is the whole version of that 5%. So mechanics gives you 5% to structure hit points or hull, and this is required for using armor repairs, which is really, really important to be able to use all your armor repairs. And as you get into medium and large, you'll need the skill trained player. So a T2 large armor repper requires this train to 5. You taking questions, or you just reset? Or is this just a reset tutorial? I am taking questions. We're going to go through this armor tab really quick, and then we'll get there. The next skill, I guess the compensations. The capital remote and armor repair systems are for capital remote armor repair systems reduces the capacitor need for repair systems. I believe the same thing is true for the remote armor repair systems. And then the compensations. And the last skill is repair systems, which reduces the repair duration per cycle. It makes it use more cap, but it also makes you repair more. A shorter duration means that you can repair a lot faster, and that's really helpful. So yeah, that's that. What's better for alphas? An all-in armor or shield? All in one or the other. So it doesn't matter if you're an alpha or an omega. Shield and armor are different ways of tanking, and the way that they're balanced is fairly even for both alphas and omegas. So an alpha can equally shield tank and armor tank, as an alpha can shield tank and armor tank, and an omega can equally shield tank and armor tank as an omega can shield tank and armor tank. The big deciding factor is the ship that you're flying. Outplayed is Incursion meta still Mega, Mac, Bassi Sim. So the shield doctrine is Bassi Scimitar, Vindicator, Nightmare, and Lashik, and Macariel. So basically all weapon systems are there. It's still pretty much what it is. I think they prefer Hyperions now. It's a little bit different for new bros. They used to ask new bros to fly Vindicators, now they ask them to fly Hyperions, which is interesting. Do we have any more questions about tank? Love to answer some more. And off topic to see all that. Have you ever done any routing in a Titan? No, I haven't. My character can fly just about everything. So if I look in Spaceship Command, there's a few ships that I can't fly. And all these skills are for single ships, except for Black Ops, which I need to buy the skill book. But I can't fly any of the Titans. I am technically, to sit in a Titan, I would be 1 hour. Actually, no. Total training time. Jump portal generation. Capital. I need to train capital ships 5, but I have no intention of sitting in a Titan. I'm not a fan of capitals, as I'm a high-sec Care Bear. But I do occasionally fly carriers, and I do occasionally fly dreadnoughts. I think groups starting to experiment with Lashiks when I left. Yep. Lashiks are a thing. If you hang in Edencom is a good reason to fly armor over shield. Yeah. You could design your entire doctrine around that bonus. So my doctrine is a armor doctrine that I have, and you get the extra HP. Come to Yudama. How do you make enough is to fly jets? I run missions. My current balance on my wallet is... I haven't looked at this today. I actually plex all my accounts too at the moment. I'm thinking about changing that. But I'm sitting on 31 billion ISK right now. So either hear from the... Whose shirts do you wear? This is a Twitch shirt? No, I do level 4 missions mostly. I also occasionally run level 5s. Whose shirts do you wear? But the shirts that we're going to be using to make, which is coming, by the way. I actually got the first one. Hold on, let me go grab it really quick. But I got the first sample last week, and I've been wearing it. Oh, that's a Scooby-Doo shirt. Where did my... But we actually got the first sample of Hateless merch. And it is... says Care Bear. It's coming. I'm still working on it, and I'm ironing out the details, and I want to do more than just one merch store, but Hateless merch is coming. But yeah, this one says Care Bear, and it is, if you're a subscriber, it's the 1 month sub badge that I decided to make the Care Bear emote. And I'm thinking about doing the other one. I know Dangerous will buy it, and he's going to be mad at me if I make it a shirt, because he already bought one. And Ground, given the question, we'd like to inform you that you really made the grade. You guys want a siege emote too? You know, iron out that shirt. I need to do a lot. I wore that shirt for 2.5 days straight, so I should probably wash it first. But I bought it, and I want to wear it for a little while and wash it a few times and actually make sure it's a good quality shirt. Because I have the Streamfleet shirt, and it's already starting to peel a little bit, and I don't like that. So I didn't use Redbubble. I went with Teespring. I just like to say things as people, including me, don't always say it. You've been active with the chat, allows us to have a little community, and even though I've been playing since, it allows me to double check certain things and allows second opinions. I think that some streamers don't engage with the audience unless they're like tier 1000, sub 100. Anyways, keep up the good work. That's the goal, to build a community here. Every single one of you guys is important. Yes, level 4s is the main way I make ISK. I generally pull in an insane amount of ISK per month. So I'm kind of up in the air right now. So, okay, here's where I'm at. Where's the Eve launcher at? So I don't want to show my account, but I want to show this. There's a sale. It is 15% off all Omega subscriptions right now. So I'm half tempted to subscribe all my accounts. For a year. I am doing Twitch vs. Eve 4 tomorrow, and that is tomorrow, and I'm super stoked for it. This is basically the Black Friday. So I've been tossing the idea of subscribing all my accounts so I have more ISK to use, because my yearly bill for EVE Online, if we figure it out, so we can go Alt-R and we can look at Plex. Or actually, let's figure this out. So utilities calculator, we're going to go, it's 13 times a month. So a 360-day subscription, or 12-month Omega. So we go and we do 12 times 6 equals 72. It cost me 72 times the Plex bill to subscribe for a year, because I've been playing completely free to play for the last few years, and the current Plex bill is, dude, what is going on here? The current Plex bill, pilot services Plex, view market details. Cheese has gone up to, price lowest, please. Buy this, 500 of them. You won't calculate unless there's actually 500, sweet. 500 of them is 1.4, so we can do 72 times 1.4 multiplied by 1.4 equals roughly 100 billion-ish. So it costs me per year to play EVE Online right now 112 billion-ish. You guys ask me where all my ISK goes that I spend grinding and earning. It goes to sub my accounts. I have 6 accounts and I keep them subbed. But for the crazy price of $9.31 a month, I could do that. Which is, I've never seen 12-month on sale before. I've been playing this game since 2012. I've never seen 12-month Omega Time on sale. But if I do that, it means that I have a lot of ISK to do things with you guys and to bring you guys additional content. Supports the game and also allows me to keep the money. But it would be an investment from the Twitch income. So how I've been handling the income from Twitch is it just goes and gets put aside to be saved until something comes up that I need. No, it's not a sin. So yeah, I would save $60. Yeah, that's a lot. So when something comes up for the stream, I have the money for it, and I haven't spent much of the money that you guys have given me from support. So you guys give me the subs and all that. So that is, so 131 to 111. That's $20 per account times 6. That's 100. That's 120 bucks. Is how much I'd save doing this versus, say, buying it for 3 months at a time. It gets significantly more expensive, but doing a bulk deal is the way to go. So I have the money from the Twitch funds, and I think it's a good way to give back to you guys. I'm just not sure if that's what I should do with Twitch funds. And I'm kind of on the fence about it. And I got 4 days to decide, if that makes sense. But I'm thinking about doing it, as it will allow me to do a lot more. I'll be able to give more players things. I'll be able to contribute to the game in a lot of ways. But the other thing that I'm doing, which is another part of the Twitch funds, is we are going to be improving the stream. I have been using the funds to improve the stream. You can buy Omega and have raffles with that. Even if you're doing, we'll give you more skin in your wallet. Yeah, it will. But if I'm gonna do it once, so if I do this once and save through a quarter, I'll probably end up making about 300 billion-ish throughout the year, anyways. So I'll have a lot of this, more content, more subs, more Twitch money. It's win-win. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Simple equals success, blow stuff up equals win. Yeah, invest in your stream. I put all my income into my Twitch into giveaways and improve the quality of stream. But yeah, my latest investment in the stream was actually the sub emotes, and that has proven to be a very good investment. Even though it's a little thing, it gives you guys like a little subscriber badge that you guys really seem to like. Could do all 3 and then catch the. Could do 3, then catch the. So I'm currently subbed through the end of December from playing with Plex, because what I do is I wait for those 425 Plex per cells, and when Plex drops from the on sale, it tends to tank in price. I tend to buy Plex cheap, and then I do the other thing. Should sell space on your chalkboard. I should sell that. You guys want space on the chalkboard? Is that what I need to start doing? Should I just sell 1 pixel at a time? Sell 1 pixel of the chalkboard. Let's go. Oh man. Names. That'd be kind of cool. Maybe I should, but the chalkboards for the educational series that I do, and I decided to add it into my OpSec screen. It is even behind it even should be in front of the kitty cam, but it's not. I didn't line that up right. 1 pixel for 1 billion. It's so many billions. That would be great. Is that your final offer? I don't know. I'll have to be thinking about it. Do you know anything about Cosmos missions? Maybe they're interesting somehow. Ouch. Cosmos missions are they're one-time run missions. I encourage you to try them, but I don't encourage you to think that they're going to make money. You want to know about Cosmos? They're a one-time run and they're fun to do, but you're not going to like be able to farm. Halloween, I didn't anything good doing the 2 rooms that I did. That's a bummer. Eve University. Yeah, it's kind of like Eve University, except I feel like I can teach like Eve University does. I do remember watching Eve University videos when I was a new player, and they helped me out a lot, and I'd like to contribute something like that to Eve Online, and that's kind of why I decided to do today's stream where I did Tanking 101, and we went through a lot today, and I have a lot of editing to do to figure that out. But one thing that I'm looking at right now for improving the stream as well, this just now came up, but I'm looking at getting new overlays made. So instead of this, like it's simple and it looks good, but doing a proper overlay where I can kind of transition through these and have a nice clean stream and overlays is something that I feel like would be really good for you guys and for me to have a proper overlay on the stream. That would be great. The E-Uni was for the Cosmos missions. They have a lot of info that is still relevant. Yes they do. But yeah, E-Uni is a good place to look up information. Cosmos missions to do bugged as hell. I couldn't start the chain with Kaldar NPC. You just didn't want to talk to me. Yeah, it's kind of painful. So I've done the Mimitar ones, and they're not really very fun to do. Do we have any other questions on tanking? Or questions about Hateless Gaming and plans for Hateless Gaming's channel or anything? I'd love to answer or whatnot. Also, what type of missions are the best? Yes, I have a hard time breaking 12 million an hour. Security is definitely the way to go. You can make a lot of ISK. One thing that people fail to do is that they fail to take into account that the LP rewards is part of a mission reward. So if we look at this mission here, the assault. Oh shit! This is a shitty mission. It's only worth 3 million ISK if I do it in 6 hours. I'm gonna get 1.5 plus 1.5. Sorry, I'm gonna get 3.5 million ISK. This isn't worth it. So if I do this like 3 times, I'm not gonna make ISK. LP rewards is a massive part of it. So you get bounties and you get LP. You end up making a lot of ISK when you actually use your LP. So for making ISK with missions, you have to learn how to consume and use the LP. There's no Google lookup. EVUni might help you. I'm 50% done with them with 27 tickets submitted. Oh man, dude, that's straight up a nightmare, Inkles. That is 100% straight up a nightmare. I'm really sorry to hear that. That's painful. So tomorrow we do have somewhat schedule. Tomorrow is Twitch vs. Eve 4. It's also Halloween. I don't know if I'm going to dress up. Maybe I should go buy a costume or something. Or I should do my old Abraham Lincoln costume. I almost won a costume contest without walking up onto stage for the costume contest interview because I dressed up as Abraham Lincoln one year and I pulled off a really good Abe Lincoln. I have to shave the mustache though, because you gotta take off the mustache to Abraham Lincoln. I'm also debating what else. When I was younger, I did Shaggy, because I looked like Shaggy from Scooby-Doo. Go as a Care Bear. You pulled Abe Lincoln off, you pervert. God. I'm not sure if I should dress up tomorrow or not. I'm kind of thinking about it. No! I should do Rasputin. I should figure out how Rasputin dresses and do a Rasputin. That's what I should do. I should definitely do Rasputin. It's in line with Halloween and everything. Mustache has to stay. Rasputin. Watch you sleep. There was a man. You very much have the Raspberry going, yeah. People have said that. So maybe I'll figure out how to dress up. But tomorrow is Twitch vs. Eve 4. That's really exciting. And then Sunday we're doing a public fleet out of Jita. I'm not going to tell you what we're doing yet because I don't know how many are coming. And what we do depends on how many comes. So on Sunday at about 2 hours before now at noon my time, which is almost 2 my time, we'll be doing a public fleet that everybody is welcome to. And it's going to be a not purple shoot it fleet where depending on the fleet size, we are either going to go into the Pochvin region or we're going to go out and do we are going to be kitchen sink armor shields. I need to design a fleet and come up with how we're going to fly, and I think that it'll be mostly kitchen sink. I'm not going to do a strict doctrine, but we're going to do a light doctrine. We're going to ask you to fit specific modules to your ship so that you meet certain requirements on your ship, and that's going to be basically it for the requirements on the fleet. But Twitch Receive tomorrow, I am streaming the entire Twitch Receive from the beginning to the end, and we are going to continue on after Twitch Receive all the way to 7 or 8 p.m. I plan on streaming all day tomorrow, and it's going to be a fun day. I'm really excited. Dude, what's the best ship for non-omega to grab shit and get out of vulnerable stations? The Synesis. It's a really good one. So the Sun Special Edition destroyer here, the Synesis. This guy can fit a sub 2 second alignment time. So we can get that alignment time below 2 seconds. You might need more or less inertial stabilizers, but if we go hull and propulsion, yeah, not specific modules. Propulsion, and we go propulsion upgrades. So for me, it is 1 inertial or 2 inertial stabilizers, gives me 1.76, and then it's got a base cargo of 600 M3. Go into hull upgrades and do expanded cargo holds 1, 2. Uses that up to 975. We have 3 rig slots. We're gonna go ahead and rigs. We're gonna go ahead and do armor rig. No, astronautics rigs. And then here's the question: is it better? So we can put on a low friction nozzle joint. Oh, these are medium. So we can put on a low friction nozzle joint. And that gives us sub 2, and then we can put this on. So is this better? So we have sub 2 second alignment time. And then we can throw on these. This gives us 1.7, and then if we did it this way, I should never optimize this. We took off so that's the better way to do a low friction nozzle joint. But you may need both. You may need run 2 inertial stabilizers. What was I looking for? Rigs. A low friction nozzle joint. May as well throw a tier 2 on there. And that gives us 1.79 thousand M3 with a sub 2 second alignment time, which allows us to have a good time. And this is 17 million ISK with the T2 low friction nozzle joint. With that one, it's 15 million ISK. This will safely get in and out of stations pretty quick. Yeah. Join an op sign. But yeah, this is how I would do that. I would use this, and then you still have power grid CPU. I would fit enough to deal with a smart bomb here, or deal with a single smart bomb. But I put the biggest shield extender I could on it. Shield